Sanibonani, good evening, Dumalanga, and welcome to episode 206 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Kumalo. It's a Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast, and if you're joining us for the first time, well, you have missed 205 episodes, so do make sure that you go to our Facebook or YouTube page to catch up on all the great content that we have already brought to your screens. And to all our regular viewers, welcome back on the Private Property Podcast. You know how we do it every single weekday at 7 p.m. We tackle a hot property topic and get a better sense of how we can better manage our property and our home ownership journey. And it doesn't matter whether you're a tenant, whether you're a landlord, whether you're looking to buy or sell or even build. This certainly is the show that you want to get plugged into to learn as much as you can to help you on your property journey. And one of the other things that you probably want to do is, of course, check out all of the other great shows that we've got here on the private property social media pages. Of course, I am talking about the First Time Home Buyers show that AC Claassen brings to your screens every single Wednesday at 8 p.m. So to all those first-time home buyers who want to make sure that they know what's what when it comes to their home ownership journey, that is a show that you do not want to miss out on. And to all of you at home who've got green fingers, perhaps you're an aspiring farmer, well, the Farming Podcast with Umbali Nwogo is the show for you. Every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 p.m., Umbali speaks to an expert in the agricultural space and helps you better understand what you can anticipate should you want to walk that particular path. And over the weekend, Chad gives you a great snapshot of some of what you can expect in some of the best complexes and estates that this country has on offer on the Home Shoppers Show. Well, we certainly have quite a wide variety of various programs across the private property social media pages that you can tune into. And of course, if there are other shows that you want us to tackle or other topics that you want us to go into, then do send us suggestions down here below. We absolutely love hearing from you. And another thing that we absolutely love hearing from you about is, of course, the great competitions that we get to run on our social media platforms. Now, we are running the Sherlock Holmes competition to kickstart 2021. This is a competition we're running for the next 12 weeks. We're now halfway into the competition, and all you have to do is to go onto our website, www.privateproperty.co.za, and crack the riddle. It is that simple. We share a riddle every single Monday morning that we want you to crack, and if you think you know where the riddle leads you, then do make sure that you enter that competition to stand a chance of walking away with 5,000 Rand voucher every single Friday. And to make sure we keep things spicy, we've also added spot prizes every Wednesdays and Thursdays where you can stand a chance of walking away with 500 Rand in cash. And all you have to do is to be watching us live on air in order to be able to claim your prize. Now, the clue for this week, or the riddle for this week, is one that I'm sure a lot of Durbanites are probably going to absolutely love. And it is in the northern part of Durban, in the middle of 10 and 20 bars, you'll find a house in 3 dimensions with a pool your pets will love. That is the riddle for week 6 of the Sherlock Holmes competition. So do get hunting and let us know where you think it might be leading you. Now, to get started with our conversation this evening, this is one that we tend to get asked quite a bit by you at home. Sometimes you yourselves are in a situation, or it's your partner who might be, and you want to better understand how you can do this and essentially how you can get a home loan. And of course, that is a non-citizen's guide to securing a home loan in South Africa. So if you're non-South African and you're looking at having a home loan in South Africa, then this is the show that you do not want to miss out on. We've often gotten questions, from viewers who are non-South African. They've been living in South Africa for quite a number of years, or sometimes your spouse is not South African and you're looking at getting a joint bond and you just want to better understand how you should be navigating your bond application process. What are some of the things that are going to be required? What do you almost need to prepare yourselves about very early on before you even start applying for that home loan. And to help us better understand how we can do this and what we need to know if we're non-South Africans and looking to get a home loan in South Africa, I'm joined this evening by Natasha Champion, who's a regional sales manager at OOBA Homeloans. Natasha, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's always such a pleasure to have you on the show, Natasha. I was saying earlier that this is one of those topics that we tend to get asked about, especially when we talk about just, getting a home loan, the process of getting a home loan. You'll have viewers who say sometimes that they themselves are non-South African. Is the process the same? Or sometimes their spouse is a non-South African and they're looking at buying, as a couple. So it's a joint bond. Perhaps first, let's kind of look at overall, are there significant differences when a non-South African tries to get a home loan versus when a South African tries to get a home loan?
Yes, so there definitely are. I think the first thing we need to do is understand the applicant's residential status. So is it a permanent resident with an ID number? Are they on a work permit, a spouse visa? So depending on the exact residency status, there will be a different set of qualifying criteria, specifically in terms of deposit requirements at the bank, Summer.
Mm-hmm. And I think, we'll get to that, Natasha, because I've certainly heard a lot of non-South Africans who've been staying in South Africa a number of years, working here for a number of years, talking about the barrier being that high deposit that's typically needed. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Perhaps let's look at, because you're saying that one of the big things is, differentiating what the residency status is of the particular applicant, and that would essentially dictate the route. Let's perhaps first look at somebody who does have residency and sort of has an ID number versus somebody who's probably just here on a work permit, doesn't have an ID number yet, but already knows they'll probably be staying here for a number of years. And as they're staying here, wants to get into property or buy a property because they rate it's probably just cheaper or it works out better for them. Perhaps explain sort of those two differences when you have permanent residency in South Africa versus when it's only a work permit and you don't have residency.
Sure. So I think if you've got PR, you're in possession of a South African ID number. That kind of, regardless of your place of birth, means that you really are on a par in terms of the bank requirements as a South African citizen would be. So I think if permanent residency is your residency status and ID number is in place, you've got the same chances of the same loan to value bond approvals as a South African born individual. When it comes to work permit holders, that's a little bit different. The banks are going to ask for more information, employment contracts, obviously passports, and certainly will be subject to higher deposit requirements depending on the lenders. They've all got slightly different criteria, Zama.
And perhaps, Natasha, almost take us through some of the criteria that they may typically have. I know you're saying, we often know this, different financial institutions would typically have relatively different sets of criteria, but almost broadly speaking, what are some of the criteria that you would typically find across the different financial institutions?
So it would vary from a 50% deposit requirement all the way up to a 90% or a 95% loan to value that could be reached, depending on the lender and depending on the client's specific circumstances. So, making use of an originator that knows the way the banks look at things are certainly going to increase your chances of getting the absolute best deal.
And when you were just saying 50% deposit, I was just, what? Because I think there almost isn't anybody who would have those kinds of savings, put aside. I mean, if you're looking at, for example, buying R1 million property, the majority of people typically wouldn't have R500,000, ready for that particular transaction. And we know you also need, your transfer fees to also have been saved up. So it certainly is one of those fairly difficult hills, I suppose, for non-South Africans who only have, a work permit. Natasha, I want us to sort of go into perhaps some of the mistakes that applicants, and let's look at firstly, ones who do have permanent residency, you're saying that more often than not, they're pretty much on par with South Africans. But have you found that there may be instances where there are certain mistakes that they make that I'll say jeopardizes their application while they're applying, or is it essentially similar mistakes as South Africans would typically make when they also apply for their home loan?
So non-South African citizens, I think the only thing that they potentially work on in preparation for a bond application is their credit score. Obviously there's a process in terms of opening a bank account, in terms of opening a various retail accounts, and as a result of that, haven't been able to build a credit score within the borders of South Africa. Mm-hmm. So when banks have a look at the applicant's credit score upon assessing the application, and they see very little activity, there is no frame of reference in terms of financial responsibility and the way that they're currently looking after their accounts. So as we know, lack of credit score or poor credit score is going to eliminate our chances of approval first and foremost, depending on how bad it is. But certainly it can also negatively affect the loan to value, so the deposit requirement, as well as the interest rate offered. So I'd encourage any kind of non-South African citizens to, as soon as possible, open a bank account, open a couple of small store accounts, and start building up that credit profile.
Mm-hmm. We are in conversation this evening to Natasha Champion, who's the regional sales manager at OOBA Home Loans, and we're looking at a non-South African's guide to securing a home loan in South Africa. If you've had any questions or comments when it comes to this one, do send them through. I want to hear from you at home. If you yourself are perhaps a non-South African or you're now a permanent resident, how your home ownership journey was like. Did you find it particularly difficult, or it was a fairly smooth process? And in the event where perhaps you and your partner, and your partner is the one who's the non-South African, how was your journey into home ownership? Do share your experience down here below with us. Now, Natasha, I think one of the other things then that I'd want to look at when we look at the non-South Africans who are only on their work permit, perhaps they also take us through what some of the mistakes may be that they may make, or that sort of lessens their odds of securing a home loan, because I can imagine that with some of them, perhaps you not maybe as familiar with the process. And I mean, already home ownership is just such a daunting experience. I can't imagine what it's like, buying it in a foreign country that you're now currently living and working in. What are some of the mistakes you found that some of them sometimes make that sort of hinders their likelihood of securing that home loan?
So applicants that are on work permits, I think depending on the country that they come from, or indeed, a lot of blue chip companies have got branches in South Africa, and they send their employees from overseas countries. What we find, and it's a tricky rule of thumb to really challenge, but it would be incredibly helpful, when contract negotiations take place, if the salaries earned could reflect in a South African bank account as opposed to a foreign bank account, or at least a portion of them. A lot of these applicants get substantial housing allowances, which we can use obviously to support their affordability. But because it's earned often in a different country with different bank accounts in different languages, that becomes more of a challenge to get that application looked at successfully.
And I mean, I can imagine with so many, it's even probably in a different currency when it goes into that bank account. So when you're applying and sort of filling in what you're earning, you don't think of it in rands. You would typically sort of think about it in whichever currency that you are dealing with as well. Perhaps, Natasha, I'm curious to find out what, especially those who are on a working permit, how they can better get, I will say the highest LTV. When you're saying how sometimes they with some applicants, they'd probably be required to get like a 50% deposit, which is quite a huge sum of money. Are there things that they could essentially do to try and get sort of the highest LTV possible for their particular home loan?
Absolutely. So as I said before, we need to send that application to more than one bank, because each lender is going to have a different appetite depending on the specific circumstances. So we need to multi-submit, and we don't expect the client to do that by themselves. As you say, it can be quite a daunting task. So definitely connect with someone that specializes in preparing the application, submitting it for the best possible outcome, and then negotiating back and forth. From a practical perspective, again, that customer, that client has to open up a South African bank account as soon as possible. So as soon as he's got a South African bank account open, there's a connection with that specific lender, which assists the process. And please make sure in preparation for a bond application, if your employment contract is in a different language, the banks are 100% going to ask for a translated version that is verified.
Because I think that is one of those tricky things. I mean, you could literally be coming from even a European country that's French speaking, or any of the other languages, or, Francophone Africa, where the language would, obviously be French. So you certainly do need to make sure that it's translated into English, so that everybody can follow what is being said. Well, we are taking your questions and comments, talking about non-South Africans' guide to, a home loan in South Africa. We've got a question. It's a slightly different from what we are discussing, but does deal with the non-citizen. I wonder if you'd be able to address this one, Natasha. The question is coming from Jason de Jong, who asks, when a will is made out to a non-South African citizen, how long does it take for the property to be registered onto that person's name, especially when that person was married to the deceased?
So, I'd have to have more details to adequately answer that. I also am not an attorney, so I'd hate to give you the wrong advice. It would depend if the client is currently residing in South Africa, or if they are living in a foreign country. So I think in terms of their residency, their physical residency, that will factor in.
I mean, Jason, I think one of the things we can probably do is ask one of our attorney, previous guests, because it is one of those attorney questions. And I did give that disclaimer before even addressing it to Natasha, because it is one of those things that you probably want an attorney to fully verify, because they would be the ones making sure that the transfer occurs. When Natasha comes in, is certainly in the earlier stages. So way before transfer has to happen, when we're still looking at how do we better our credit scores, how do we, work with the bond originator in securing that home loan. And Natasha, which probably brings me to my next question. I mean, we're talking about this slightly off air, when we then look at working with the bond originator, how important is it, particularly for, we'll say, non-South African applicants? Because already, I think some people don't know about bond origination or how it might work. So how important is it for particularly, non-South Africans, because that's the area of discussion this evening, to be able to work with, a company like OOBA Home Loans when it comes to ensuring that they're able to get their home loan secured?
I think particularly for everyone that's looking to purchase, but for foreign nationals that aren't familiar with the way things potentially work in this country, what documents are required, which banks potentially are friendlier than others, it's actually wise, and we've had it, if we meet the clients via our real estate partners, we've had that introduction made kind of as that person lands, before that agent actually takes them to any properties that they could potentially fall in love with and be disappointed. It's all about expectation management. And if we're able to spend time with that client, understanding the details of that application, we can verify their affordability and prepare them to the extent where we can say, if you don't have an account here, I would suggest you open it with Bank X in order for us to get the best value. So the earlier on in the process, the more we can assist that foreign buyer with tips and assistance in terms of preparing for that outcome. Instead of doing it the other way around, Zama, getting into a car, falling in love with homes, loving the exchange rate, thinking that their euros and their dollars are going so far, but realizing that there still might be a substantial, cash deposit required. So I think earlier on, we can make relevant. We can make a relevant difference in terms of preparing that purchaser. more even than your traditional South African citizen, where it's quite basic.
And, it actually leads me to what, as you're answering that, something that came to mind, Natasha, was because you were saying how with so many foreign nationals, some of them might think, well, I'm currently isn't an issue, so to speak, service that particular home loan. And a part of me was almost thinking, what becomes I'll say what ends up having more weight? I mean, we often talk about the importance of your credit score and working on your score, making sure that you keep it clean and you maintain it, now versus applicants who might be earning, top dollars, especially when you sort of convert it into rands. It works out to be lots and lots of rands, but perhaps have a very thin credit score. So how do financial institutions, have you found, sort of weigh that particular one up? Because they do find themselves in a situation where they have the money and they've got sort of that contract, but as you're saying, the credit score may not necessarily be there.
Exactly. So, affordability first and foremost is the way that the banks are going to ensure that you qualify for that bond of earnings. That remains a big factor. And affordability, obviously, when it comes to a home loan, is one of the major factors in assessing that applicant. However, without a frame of reference to try and gauge the risk of that client in terms of what type of payer they are, the deposit requirements are half, exchange control regulated, and half of them are bank specific based on risk because they are taking a chance. How long is that client going to be in the country? How long is his work contract for? Can he get an extension? Is he going to buy a house and then go back to wherever he came from? The banks aren't in the business of repossessing property. That's not what they're here to do. They're supplying a product, and obviously they generate income from the interest over the term of that loan. So the non-res, there are various factors. Can I tell you that affordability is more important than credit record? No, it kind of factors in the same. That's why try and get in front of it. Try and open those accounts as soon as you possibly can. I think bank account first and foremost. And then start with retail accounts. It can take as little as 3 or 4 months to start building up a score.
And I think, one of as you were saying that, Natasha, it reminds me of what we constantly even say to South Africans themselves, because I think sometimes with some first-time home buyers who perhaps, especially I'm thinking now, particularly on when we look at young professionals where you start working, perhaps you have a really good package. I'm thinking of, the doctors, perhaps some of the engineers. And so you will say theoretically or financially will have the financial means to be able to service the debt that you potentially may want to take on when it comes to buying that property. But you may not have a credit score because you've been a student all these years and didn't have any, credit cards or any kind of debt whatsoever. And now here you are, you start working. One of the first things you want to do is sort of jump in and be a homeowner. And how we always say, let's take it a notch back a little bit. Because perhaps, Natasha, talk to our viewers a little bit about, the importance of why we keep harping on this credit score thing or importance, even when you can financially prove that you can service the debt. Because I think sometimes people don't realize the importance of the negotiating stage. Do that with your bond originator, where once you're looking at all these different offers, there's always that dance that sort of keeps happening with the different banks, and you're trying to choose which one to go with and how to best get that really good rate for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so ironic. We were, both of us, or I definitely was raised, you don't have debt, don't have credit cards. If you don't have the money, don't buy it. I remember my mom saying that to me. And then you enter the real world and you've heeded your parents' advice or your guardian's advice, and you've had no debt. But we do need to definitely create some sort of a payment profile. Because as I mentioned before, that is the bank's frame of reference when they are calculating your risk. So if I can simplify it, say you've got a true worst account, for example, you've missed 3 payments in a row, or you've underpaid, or you've paid late, but you're now going to a financial institution and saying, give me R1 million, I promise I'll pay that prepayment back every month, even though I haven't managed kind of to have that financial responsibility to service my true worth. So that's very basically, what a credit score is going to do. Obviously, it's going to tell us whether you've got judgments or whether you've got defaults and if things have gone legal. But other than those big things that we always think is what a credit score is made up of, banks have got sight of 2 years worth of payment profile history. So they can see that same true worth account for the last 24 months and all the payments you missed. Please, I don't want buyers to think that if there's been an issue or if there's been a mistake, there's certain companies in South Africa that are quick to erroneously put people on credit bureau. I'm not going to mention names, but I think we all know who a couple of them are. Start engaging. If you're disagreeing with a company that's billing you incorrectly, please start engaging. In order for us to motivate, we are going to need to explain, and we're going to need a mail trail, a document trail in terms of to say, look, this was a mistake, this is how. Because the bureaus aren't always that quick to rectify things on that side. So we can definitely motivate it from that side. So once we understand what your score is, we've got quite a detailed overview, where the issues are. And even if we delay that purchase by 3 months, you're still closer to that home loan than you would have been if you had just taken a chance.
And I think one of the big things, Natasha, is probably if you walk the path, sort of work on your credit score, get it to where you optimally want it to be, it also puts you in a better position to negotiate on your rate. And that's probably one of the things that people don't realize the effects of getting the right rate, from the onset. Because if you're able to, because by virtue of having a good credit score, if you're able to negotiate your rate, even if it's by 0.25%, that over the 240 months term is quite significant. And you definitely also wouldn't want to find yourself in a situation where you want to jump banks because you think that now, let's say after 3 years of servicing the home loan, now you think maybe let me skip banks and go to another bank, because that also has associated costs. So there certainly is value in working on the credit score, being able to be like, it's now at the right sort of place, at an optimal place, because you can have that bit of negotiating room with the financial institutions.
Absolutely. I mean, the higher your score, the better your interest rates. Assuming affordability is in order and value is found in the property, that is directly linked to the type of pricing you're looking at. And certainly, Zama, I must agree with you. If people don't shop around, they're not going to know what else is out there. And we originators aren't aligned to any specific. We're not here to take you away from your bank, but we can certainly make them work a little bit harder for that business.
And that's such an important one, because sometimes you may end up still going with your bank, but it may be 2% less than what they were probably going to initially offer you. We are taking your last questions and comments. We've got one from Facebook, Usmangaliso Sahache, asking, is there a restriction on which type of property can be financed by the bank loan by non-South Africans?
So absolutely. I'd say residential property would probably be where they draw the line, certainly the home loan departments within the banks. So it would need to be residential. It doesn't really matter, sectional title, freehold. There are restrictions, but not specific to foreign nationals with regards to agricultural holdings and sizes. Multi-let properties, also could potentially be a commercial loan as opposed to a traditional home loan. But no, there aren't any restrictions based on your residency status.
Natasha, before we wrap up, any final tips to viewers at home when it comes to applying for a home loan when they are non-South African citizens?
So guys, before you go out, and the state agents will see your dollars or your euros a mile away, and they're going to want to show you all these beautiful homes. Remember also, when you've done your homework, you become a qualified buyer, an empowered buyer. You can also then negotiate a little bit with the seller, because if the seller's got various offers from people, even if they are slightly higher, and he's taking a chance without having that vetting process completed, there's additional room for negotiation. So even in terms of finding that home and putting your offer in. Not only do we know our chances of successful approval are better because we've done that homework, so does your agent and so does your seller.
And that's a great note to leave it. Natasha, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Summer.
And that is Natasha Champion, who's the Regional Sales Manager at OOBA Homeloans. And that's the end of our show this evening here on the Private Property Podcast with myself, Zamantungwa Khumalo. This evening, I do not leave you alone. Do stay tuned for the Farming Podcast with Umbali Nogo. That's going to be coming to your screens at 8 p.m. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Clinton Banfield. Our family and I live in Cape Town on the Western Seaboard. To be able to wake up and take in the scenery every day is an absolute pleasure. We probably have the best views of Table Mountain. There's some really amazing suburbs in our neighborhood. There's Milnerton, which is a central hub close to the city. There's some beautiful homes situated along the canal, which give you a breathtaking view of Table Mountain. A little bit further along the canal, you'll find Milnerton Golf Club, which is a great place to unwind with your mates. Then we have Bloberg, which is world-renowned for its beaches, where you'll often see kite surfers taking full advantage of the wind. To top it off, there's a great variety of family restaurants in the area, like Blue Peter, where people love to meet. The Bayside Mall is a landmark in Tableview, giving you an all-round retail experience in a relaxed and convenient environment. As a family, we've chosen to live in Atlantic Beach Golf Estate in Melkbosstrand. Our suburb is so chilled, it really gives you this constant holiday feel. We've lived here for 2 years and we've really enjoyed the laid-back lifestyle, and this is our neighborhood.